This is Person of Interest.
No specific or credible threats. What if I told you that a college football coach recruited a high school player, mentored him for nearly 3 decades, helped shape him into an NFL coach, and neither of them knew they were father and son? This isn't fiction. This isn't a movie script. This is the true story of Deland McCullough and Sherman Smith. In the first episode, Deland McCullough and I discussed his upbringing. He and I played college football together in the early 1990s at Miami University of Ohio.
Me and you played together my redshirt freshman year. So what's that, 1992? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Your last year was my first year as a starter over there.
A lot of what he shared, I didn't know when we were teammates. That he was adopted, grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. Deland's adoptive parents divorced when he was 2. It was hard. At times, the house he grew up in relied on an extension cord to provide electricity. Adele Comer, his adopted mother, worked hard to provide for her son. Through it all, Deland excelled on the football field, gaining ground, running for the goalpost, as if his life depended on it. In some ways, his future did. Football was his ticket to success, a diploma, and perhaps NFL glory, and all that comes with it. But there was something else driving him too, finding his birth parents. It was the void that was always there. So he started searching and found Carol Briggs, his birth mother. She was 16 years old when she discovered she was pregnant, just a teenager herself, facing an impossible situation. Baby's father, Sherman Smith, was away at college on a football scholarship. Carol never told him about their son. By his senior year of high school, Deland McCullough had become one of the most sought-after recruits in Ohio. College scouts lined up to meet the talented defensive back and running back. Then, one day in 1990, a red Mercedes-Benz pulled up to his high school. Out steps Sherman Smith, running backs coach for Miami University of Ohio.
From the 44, McCullough is wide right, large.
In the pros, he was nicknamed the Sherman Tank. Boy, was he charismatic. He knew how to connect with the players he was recruiting.
I would always tell those guys, you may not be looking for a father, I'm going to treat you like my son.
That statement is Sherman Smith's mantra. For Deland McCullough, those words meant everything. Sherman Smith was the perfect role model for Deland. He leaned on his faith, and he himself had broken records in Miami.
Senior quarterback from Youngstown.
In this video from the early 1970s, he's number 10, slicing through defenses and leading the football team to top 10 rankings before being selected in the second round by the Seattle Seahawks. But before Deland played at Miami, Sherman Smith moved on to coach at the University of Illinois. He and Deland stayed in touch. The bond didn't break. He also rewrote the record books, even on the field. The similarities were uncanny. Only later would they both find out that the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. Deland wasn't the biggest, fastest, or strongest player on the field. He had something a stopwatch doesn't clock. Youngstown, Ohio's inner strength and determination, forged through hard times and perseverance. After Miami, Deland played for the Cincinnati Bengals in the NFL. Then the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the CFL. When his playing career ended, he turned to coaching, just like Sherman. He started at the high school level, worked his way up to college, and eventually made it to the NFL. In 2020, as running backs coach for the Kansas City Chiefs, he earned a Super Bowl ring. Meanwhile, Sherman Smith had become one of the most respected running backs coaches in football, spending years coaching under Pete Carroll with the Seattle Seahawks. Two men, 2 running backs coaches, both in the NFL, both mentoring young players with the same philosophy, treating them like sons. Yet neither knew they were actually father and son. The discovery came after Deland had a family of his own, a dedicated wife, Darnell, and 4 sons. Their questions further fueled him to find answers. In 2017, Pennsylvania and Ohio unsealed adoption records, making it easier for him to find his birth parents.
I'm moving in. I got spring ball. I got a bunch of stuff going on. I was not thinking about it after I sent the information in.
At the time, he was 45 years old, a successful NFL coach.
So then I went on Facebook again. And then I didn't limit it to Pittsburgh. And then I seen her picture of my actual mom. I looked over on my desk at my picture, me and my family. I said, hey, we might have a shot here. I was in the special teams meeting and my phone pinged and it said message read. I was like, oh, shoot. And then I sent, I went on Facebook and I just put a question mark because I asked the question. You know, were you in Pittsburgh? Did you have a baby? 1972, you put him on for adoption. She said, yes. And man, I stepped out of that room. I stepped out into the hallway and I said, what did you name the baby? And she typed back, not Deland. So I started laughing. And I said, what did you name your baby? And she said, John. And she spelt it the exact same way that it was on my birth record. And I just started crying, man. The secretary outside, see her in the hallway, she's like, Coach, you okay? I said, yeah, I'm good. I'm actually real good.
She had never forgotten about him, posting birthday messages to him on her Facebook wall every year, hoping that somehow he'd see them. When Deland called her, it didn't take long for him to ask the question that he'd wanted to know the answer to his entire life.
I just go right into it. I said, well, shoot, who is my dad? And she said, your dad is a man named Sherman Smith. And when she said that, shoot, Jeff, I was like, man, what? I mean, I was blown away.
You must have said, are you joking?
Yeah.
You're kidding me, right?
So she could hear change in my tone. I said, oh, I know him. She said, what's wrong? I said, oh, I know him. She said, how do you know him? And I said, he recruited. He was my coach. He's been my mentor for over 20 plus years.
The man who had told him,
I would always tell those guys, you may not be looking for a father, I'm going to treat you like my son.
I'm going to treat you like you're my son, actually was his father. The man Deland had looked up to for nearly 3 decades. The one person he would have chosen to be his father actually was his father.
You'd be like, Jeff, come on, man. You can do this. Come on, man.
Those are some days.
I interviewed Sherman Smith on the same day I interviewed Deland. I have called him Coach Smith since the first time I met him in 1988.
When it first became public, it just made sense. Because first of all, you and Deland sound alike. You and Deland walk alike. You and Deland look alike. I mean, it's incredible.
I know it is. And people say they can't believe we didn't see the connection. And I said, well, there was no reason for us to believe there was a connection. There was no reason to say, well, you know what, maybe you are my son. Like, okay, so there was no reason to believe that.
Okay, so he called you and he was telling me he didn't expect you to call him right back. You called him right back.
Uh-huh.
And he said he was trying to, he didn't really have a plan of what he was going to say. So he just came out with it.
Yeah.
But he said, you said to him, okay, I need some time. Let me get back to you.
I need to process
this. You need to process this.
Yes.
All right. What was going through your mind at that moment?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think that statement kind of disappointed Deland. And I told Deland, I said, after a while, because I wasn't excited like he was, but he understood after he got off the phone, he had said, you know what? I knew I was adopted and I'm looking for my biological parents. My biological mom knew she put me up for adoption, and she was looking for her biological son. He knew nothing. All of a sudden, I call him up and I say to him, my biological mom said, "You're my dad." You know, yeah, how he said he thought about now how would I react if someone called me up and told me that. So that's what I was going. I was just processing. It's like, yeah, man, I've gone from zero now. All of a sudden, I got a son that's going to turn 45 years old, and not only that, it's someone that I know, a guy that's been in my life, a guy that I've recruited and mentored, and man, had in my home and all this other stuff. And so, man, I said I need to process this right here because it blew my mind.
He had never known Carol was pregnant, never knew he had a son. After a couple of hours, he called
I
Deland.
said, I want to talk to Carol and just see how she, talk to her. And I just, yeah, man, we'll go from there. But other than that, I laugh. I tell the story how I called my aunt in Youngstown. And I said, well, this story breaks. My aunt lives there and she's the same age I am. So I called her up. I said, I just want you to know this, if this comes out, so you know what's happening. And so she got off the phone with me, Jeffrey. And so she Googles Deland. Because I told her, I said, yeah, we're going to get a DNA test. She Googles Deland, and she calls me back. She said, nephew, I can save you money on the DNA test. He's yours. so it just that's what it was. Jeffrey, just going through that, man, just process.
A DNA test later confirmed what they both already knew in their hearts. It was a 99.9% match. When Deland visited Sherman for the first time, after learning the truth, Sherman greeted him with open arms. My son, he said.
I started crying like a baby, man. I was like, oh my goodness. And you just, embracing her.
Deland had never had his father say that to him. Today, the story comes full circle in the most poetic of ways. Deland McCullough is the running backs coach for the Las Vegas Raiders. His boss, Pete Carroll, the same coach his father worked under in Seattle. Both men now embrace the philosophy that unknowingly connected them for years, treating their players like sons, because they understand, perhaps better than anyone, how powerful that kind of mentorship
something that will help you become a better man, a better husband, a better father one day. I want to make a difference in the lives of young people the way my father made a difference in my life.
Their story has been featured in the Kendrick Brothers documentary.
She says back, yes, that's what's her.
I'm stunned. He's real. It's really out there. This is really him.
And Deland recently released a book co-written with ESPN journalist Sarah Spain called Runs in the Family. The title has double meaning. Both men coach running backs, and this incredible story literally runs in the family. At 16, Carol Briggs made an impossible choice by giving up her baby for adoption. She never imagined that the baby's father would find him anyway, through football and mentorship. Sherman Smith recruited hundreds of players over his career, but only one was his actual son. And for 27 years, he kept his promise, treating him like a son, never knowing how literally true it was.